Right, Africa's debt situation is a concerning one, given the fact that many countries in the continent are either faced with debt distress or are in a situation under the high risk, of falling back into debt distress. And this comes just a couple of years after many of these countries received debt cancellation under the Heavily Indebted Poor Countries Initiative and the Multilateral Debt Relief Initiative. And like I said, just a few years after that, we find that Africa's debt burden has actually even doubled. Just considering the fact that between 2017 and 2021, the debt figures, according to World Economic Outlook statistics provided by IMF under the World Economic Outlook, you find that the debt figures rose from about 760 billion US dollars to about 1.5 trillion US dollars in 2021, and this is far above revenue mobilization in the continent, where you find that in 2017 about 322 billion was mobilized as government revenue, but in 2021 there was just a slight increase to about 470 billion US dollars. So this tells us a very clear story. It gives a very clear picture that African governments are living above their means, right? African governments are living above their means, are borrowing actually above their means, because what they accumulate as debt is far below what they mobilize as resources. And why do we have, this increase in debt figures? It is because African governments generally have a development strategy that relies heavily on public borrowing. This is against very low domestic resource mobilization in the continent. The ability of African governments to tax, to leverage, on the opportunities offered by natural resources and mineral resources in the country is still very low, also due to the issues of high incidence of illicit financial flows. We had a report by UNCTAD that indicated that about 88 billion US dollars, is being lost, in the continent, from the continent through illicit financial flows. And this is up from what the Mbeki panel published. You published about 50 billion US dollars. So you see how much money is being lost in the continent to illicit financial flows. And I must tell you that these are very conservative figures, because these are pure estimates. These are pure estimates because some of these transactions, it's very hard to track them, and Africa is losing a lot of resources, to illicit financial flows. And the issue today is how to deal with this problem. And I think the first thing is for African countries to take their responsibility by putting in place, adequate accountability mechanisms that can help them absorb, financial resources in ways that are pro-developmental, in ways that can generate development opportunities for the African citizens. Because if you look at the need for accountability, this is something that African governments cannot escape. Of course, we have the international financial and political architecture that has imposed an extractive economy on African countries, but then at home, at the national level, and at the level of the regional economic communities, African governments have to take their responsibility to institute accountability mechanisms that can help them to absorb resources in a pro-developmental way. And one of the reasons why we need accountability is also to demonstrate to the international financial institutions and our international development partners that we are able to take our responsibility. We are able to, to demonstrate, that sense of confidence, and which of course will allow these institutions, give us more space when it comes to the kind of policies that we put in place, to implement our development plans. You often have heard about conditionalities around development assistance, conditionalities around debt cancellations, conditionalities around borrowing, which of course have been instituted because these partners are not very confident that African governments are going to do the right thing. So they have always imposed these conditionalities, and some of them which generate austerity policies. So I think for African governments to be able to have, enough policy space where they can make independent decisions on the kind of development policies that they require, to implement their development plans, they have to put in place this accountability mechanism as one of the confidence building measures, right? So that we don't end up with a lot of conditionalities that end up with austerity policies which harm, the development welfare of African people.